When my dad was 16 years old, him and some of his friends went sledding in Fraser Park. He grew up in LA. They went to Fraser Park for the day to go sledding. He had 4 of his friends with him, and there were 5 of them up there, all just having a good, fun time in the snow. And one of my dad's friends, Alan, decided with my dad that they were going to hike up a little bit to this other area, and so that they could hike up there and then sled down this one really big hill. They were feeling a little more adventurous than everybody they were with. They were like, cool, we're going to have to go even higher to slide down an even bigger hill than the rest of you guys. So they split off from the group, and they get to the top, and they sled down, and they're really feeling great because they sled down this huge hill. And they get to the bottom, and they're looking around, and they start to realize they don't really know where they are anymore. They can't see their friends. They don't know which direction they came from. It's a little bit of a problem. Now, at this point in the story, when my dad tells it, he would point out that they were not the first people to ever get lost in Fraser Park. A lot of people did it before they did, apparently. So, if you were here, he would want you to know that. And this was January of 1978, so there's no cell phones, there's no GPS, there's probably not even service. So Alan and my dad are just running all over the mountain. They're calling out their friends' names, but there's no answer, there's no response. Nobody's calling back to them. And then it started getting dark. And then it started snowing. So at this point, they had a choice to make. They could either stay put and hope that help was eventually going to find them, or they could keep moving and see if they could find their way back to the group. Pretty key decision they had to make there, and they figured they couldn't have gone that far from their friends, so they were like, sure, let's try to find our way back. And as you may have guessed by now, my dad, he doesn't have the best sense of direction, okay? And unfortunately for him, neither did his friend Alan. So they're trekking through the snow, they're losing light, snow's coming down all around them, and they're getting farther and farther from the place that they started. And eventually they hiked all the way to this ridge, and there's no more path, there's no more trail, and it's completely dark out. So they figured, okay, we're just gonna have to hunker down for the night here. My dad was wearing corduroy pants and sneakers, and he did have a pretty good coat on, but just really terrible gloves, like worthless gloves. And he had a lighter with him too, actually, but couldn't manage to get a fire started in all of the snow. His skills weren't really that advanced in the wilderness department. So they cleared a little area under a tree and huddled together for warmth, and they got through the night like that, barely sleeping and freezing cold. It got so cold overnight that in the morning when my dad got up, his corduroy pants were frozen, and then they just cracked and split right open. So his legs were completely exposed to the elements, just freezing cold. But they woke up in the morning and they figured out a plan together. They said, we're on top of a mountain, so if we just hike down, eventually we're gonna get somewhere where we can get some help. So they did that, and they hiked down, and finally they found a road. And then they finally found a riverbed, which they followed until they came to an area with a few cabins around. Little cluster of cute little cabins. And one of the cabins had smoke coming out of the chimney. So they went and they knocked on the door, and a lady answered, and my dad said, you might have heard about some people who were lost. And she was like, yeah. And he was like, that's us. Because apparently at this point, everybody was out looking for them. Their friends who they'd been with had tried to find them and then had gone to their parents and been like, we lost Barry and Alan. And then they'd called the police, and everybody was looking for them at this point. And it had been so cold overnight that their families were really starting to think that they were maybe goners. They knew they weren't dressed particularly well. They were like, it's kind of a 50-50 chance at this point whether we're getting Barry and Alan back from the wilderness. So the lady lets them in, and she makes them hot chocolate, and she calls the sheriff to come and pick them up. And my dad had really terrible frostbite in his hands from the terrible, worthless gloves that he'd been wearing. And the nerves that let you do this motion were completely frozen. He couldn't do it at all. And when my dad tells the story, he says that while there were low moments out there that he thought, maybe I'm never going to make it back, maybe we're going to freeze to death out here, what he was really worried about the whole time was how much everybody else must have been worried about them, how much his parents and his family must have been thinking that they were never going to see them again. My dad was taken to the hospital, and they gave him some sort of electric shock treatment that brought the nerves back to life in his hands. Probably something that they wouldn't do now, but seemed like the best idea at the time. And eventually, by playing the guitar a lot, he was able to work his hands back to their full function. The whole incident was in the nightly news, and it even made the paper, pretty big deal. And in the paper, Alan's little brother, Richie, was famously quoted as saying, "Barry and Alan, those two couldn't find their way out of a paper bag." And it's true. And unfortunately for me, the whole not being able to find one's way out of a paper bag thing is kind of a family trait. I don't know exactly how far back it goes, but everyone we know of on my dad's side of the family has the same kind of affliction. It's just horrible sense of direction, really hazardously bad sense of direction. We all have our own stories of getting lost, some of which are more harrowing than others, but the depth of this unfortunate family trait has reached pretty epic proportions. Now, I was born and raised up in Auburn. I learned how to drive there, and I live there again now. I'm not particularly proud of this, but a few weeks ago, I did use my GPS to get to the Carl's Jr. less than 3 miles from my house. And yes, that location has been in operation since before I was born. And if you see me kind of wandering around the church campus here, it is because I am lost. I get lost here all the time. Getting lost is a regular part of life for people like me and for my dad and for my grandma and her sister and their mother, etc. Now, the theme of this worship series, Christian Folx and Folklore, is about mining the depths of our familial folkloric traditions and telling stories and finding how these traditions relate to our Christianity. And throughout this series, we've heard some really beautiful stories. We've learned about treasured family traditions, intimate pieces of the patchwork that is folklore. And by comparison, the Zimmerman family tradition of getting hopelessly lost in inclement weather, it may seem out of place. But having a family at all is such a privilege. And I recognize that sharing a trait with mine, even a really super inconvenient one, is something of a gift, something we can all talk about, something we all go through and we can relate to each other on. And what is folklore if not all of those things? Now, if you've ever been lost, you know how amazing it feels to find your way back again. Last fall, I took my friend Esco hiking in Plumas County in the Lakes Basin. And before I go on, I will say that I take full responsibility for my actions. But Esco and I have been friends for a long time, and they should have known better than to let me lead the hiking trip. So I gave Esco and my wife Anna a choice at the beginning of the day. I said, do you want to go on a short hike and then maybe do some stuff after, or do you want to go on a really long, fun adventure? And they were like, short hike, please. So it was supposed to be about a 4-mile loop, early November, pretty casual. You know, we were out there until dusk. We hiked over 10 miles, and we had to scale the side of Gold Lake Highway to find our way back again. But when I saw that car come into view, I kissed the hood of that car. If I had had a fatted calf like the dad in the story, I would have sacrificed that thing then and there. There's just something about losing a thing that when it gets returned to you, it's forever, instantly precious. What is that about something being lost that renders it precious once it gets found? In the parable of the prodigal son, which we heard Bonnie read earlier, we don't know exactly how long the father's youngest son has been gone for. The phrase, all these years, is tossed around. But it's been long enough for the son to travel to a distant country, which took a really long time at the point this story was written. It's been long enough for him to squander an entire fortune, get displaced by a famine, find a new job, and then journey all the way home again. So it's long enough that the father in the story is starting to think, maybe I'm never going to see my son again. Now, I have to imagine that if this son had taken his inheritance to a casino a couple towns over, lost the whole thing, and then come back the next day, it would have been a pretty different story. But it's because his father believed his son was lost forever that he gets welcomed home as this hero instead of a screw-up. And as the father says it a couple of distinct times in the parable, the cause for celebration is that his son was lost and is found, was dead and is alive again. But we can't find something that we never lost. Lost and found. Could that be God's way of saying, now do you get it, how precious this thing is? But what about the things that we don't lose? The father's eldest son, he's been there the whole time. He works with his dad every day. He never disobeys him. He never squanders the family fortune. Where's my fatted calf, he wants to know. Where's my party? Why are you throwing this expensive party for my little brother when I'm the one who's been by your side all these years? And it's a good question. Now, I'm a youngest sibling. Are there any other youngest siblings here today? Raise your hands, raise them high. Hi. So, question for you. Are we aware, youngest siblings, that there's a bit of a rumor going around from oldest siblings that they have it harder than we do? Has anyone heard that before? Okay, so I'm a youngest sibling, but both of my parents are oldest siblings, and I'm married to an oldest sibling. So I've heard kind of a lot of this propaganda that maybe we have it easier, that we get to learn from all their mistakes, that they paved the way and we just kind of cruise through. Yeah, I've heard a lot of that to the point that I'm kind of starting to think they're right. Yeah, I've heard my fair share, for sure. And when I read this parable, I have to ask myself, why did the youngest son go have grand adventures in a faraway country, while the older brother stayed home with his dad? Well, someone had to stay home, right? Someone had to be there to help dad with the farm and to manage the servants. Somebody's got to raise the fatted calf, and that someone naturally was the oldest child. The oldest child took on all these responsibilities, and that left his younger brother free to be the wayfarer. See, not every son has the privilege of getting lost. But the eldest son in our parable, it's not like he doesn't get anything. He has his own reward, and this is what his father says to him. He says, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours." You are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. Wow. Is it just me, or does that sound a lot better than one party with a really sick buffet? One night of celebration is just not going to make up for the years that the youngest son was missing. There's years there of birthdays, of holidays, celebrations, the little things, working hard together in the field and staying up late after a harvest. All of those things, those are the real prize. And the eldest son, he was there for all of that. But seeing the feast and the party that gets thrown for his little brother, he still feels cheated, like he's getting the short end of the stick. The oldest brother was never lost. So it's really hard for him to find the beauty in what he's been given. It's hard for him to view what he has as something that's precious. Because when something is lost and then found, poof, it's a miracle. But if we're lucky, we'll experience many blessings in our lives that we don't have to first go through the pain of losing. So how do we find the miracle in what we've already been given? Can the things we have become precious without first being lost? Don't lose it. Don't lose it. It can be precious even if you don't lose it. My sister and her husband were in town last week visiting. They were visiting all the way from Vienna, Austria, which is where they live. They've lived there for about 8 years now. And they were supposed to have visited us in the spring. And before that, they were supposed to have visited in February. And before that, they were supposed to have visited for Christmas. And by the time I saw my sister this summer, I hadn't seen her in almost 2 years. But the last time we were all in California together, before the pandemic and everything else, my sister and I, we were both visitors. I lived in New York, she lived abroad, and we'd visit together at the same time, and we would have feasts and parties and celebrations. But this time when my sister came home, I'd already been living here for like 15 months. This is where I live now. I was already home. So she came to town, and we had all these celebratory meals, and we made toasts, and we did all her favorite California things. My sister, she does not eat beef, but I'm sure if she'd said, I want a fatted calf, my parents would have been like, yeah, here you go, we found one. Let's kill it for you. My sister alone was the prodigal this time, returning after a long absence and duly celebrated. But unlike the elder son in the parable, I didn't really feel cheated because I knew how much it had hurt my sister to watch us all together over the last year, to know that we were all with each other, having the birthday celebrations, however small and stunted they were, having the holidays even if they were a little bit somber. And she was all the way an ocean away. She needed every ounce of celebration that we could throw at her. And still, it didn't begin to make the time we'd spent apart okay. That time is gone, and we don't get it back. Not by throwing a party, not by cooking a feast. We've all lost things, especially lately, right? We've come close to losing everything, many of us. And yes, that means a lot of really terrible things. But it also means that we have a chance now to find that everything we have is precious. We can celebrate every single time we make it home again, no matter how badly we messed up while we were away. And we can find that the losses that we take don't actually have to break us. It's been a long time now since my dad's hands thawed, but the memory of them being frozen like that, it stays with him. And he plays guitar every day now. And while he's not super interested in going snow camping anytime soon, he did not let what happened to him stop him from having more adventures, from taking more chances, to taking the risk of getting lost and found again. He was celebrated when he got found by his family, and we do that. We celebrate when somebody gets found because it gives them the strength to get lost again someday, to take those chances, to try and start that new life in a distant country, and maybe even to lose everything trying. For there are precious gifts to be found out there, for the ones who are lost, for the ones who find them, and for the ones who stay. Amen.